Thank you, Kelly. Howdy, James. Pat, oh, there's Pat. That's good. So now we're going to move on to item 12, Christchurch Wastewater Treatment Plant Independent Review. So we have a handful of presenters. We've got Mary, Katie, John, and Pat online. So
Pat's going first.
And Pat Doherty will go first. Welcome, Pat. How are you?
Good, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent.
So first of all, I'd like to apologise for not being there in person, but I really did try. My flight last night got cancelled when I was at the airport. And this morning I flew to Christchurch, circled your lovely city for 40 minutes, and then flew back to Nelson because of the fog. So I'm attending by Zoom. So my background, I was the CE of Nelson City Council for 5 years, ending at the end of 2023. And before that, I was CE of Kapiti Coast District Council for 10 years. But in the early part of my career, I was an infrastructure engineer and very much focused on Three Waters. So while this wasn't a technical review, my background was very useful. I also just want to say that this was a team effort by Tregaskis Brown, and we have our Chief Executive, Rebecca Elvey, attending the meeting by Zoom as well. Rebecca has had a lot of experience with this type of review, and I can honestly say without her input, the report that you have in front of you would be nowhere near as concise, as coherent as it is. So just want to acknowledge Rebecca for that. So this was a complex topic, and got more so the further we got into it. We met with 54 people in 33 interviews, and we identified 22 issues, and some of them had considerable overlap. We analysed those under three headings: symptoms, underlying causes, and contributing factors. But we also identified a lot of positives that needed to be recognised, so we added a fourth heading of positives. So look, I don't intend to tell you what you've already read in the report, but there's 6 or 7 things I just want to highlight and draw to your attention today. The first of those was the scale and impact of the stench. While I didn't smell the odour in Christchurch, I have encountered it in my career as a wastewater engineer, a proud manager of 50 hectares of ponds that turn anaerobic, and there is nothing quite so bad. It's absolutely appalling. It does stick to the clothes, it does stick to washing. And for those residents in the eastern suburbs having to put up with this day after day, they were experiencing physical symptoms, and they were experiencing stress symptoms. And to put it in context, if you look at Appendix 5, we showed the number of complaints received. And there's the data from the Smelted app, the ECAN Smelted app. And so that app scores people to rate the smell on a scale of 1 to 6, where 4 is you can smell it inside the house with the windows shut, and 5, I can't use my house for some activities because of the smell. And over the 10,600 complaints that were registered on that app in the time that the council had access to it, the average score was 4.5. So somewhere between it's getting into the house with the window shut and I can't use parts of my house. The impact on those people was terrible. In our interviews, we also encountered people still demonstrating symptoms of stress. And that's one of the reasons that we included a suggestion for improvement relating to the provision of counselling services. We came up with 2 key recommendations, 2 issues that need to be addressed above all others. The first of those are related to developing effective and respectful relationships with the affected communities. And there were three background issues to that. Now, when we were meeting with people, I had a list of quick topics I wanted to cover, but the process was we would ask each person to tell us their story from the day the fire started to the day the smell stopped. And there were 3 issues that the community representatives continually raised without prompting from me. The first of all those was investment in earthquake repairs. And there was a remarkable consistency from the community reps that the council had underinvested in earthquake repairs in the eastern suburbs. They felt they had been shortchanged and looked at the rest of the city and felt that the rest of the city was being treated better. Interestingly enough, virtually all the staff and elected members we talked to had a differing view, and talked about the amount of money that had gone into underground infrastructure and just how much money had been spent in that area. We didn't start diving deep to try and reconcile those differences, but we just point out there is a difference there, and that's one of the reasons that led to the suggestion for improvement about targeting the eastern suburbs through the LTP consultation process. The next one that was raised frequently was the organics processing plant, the OPP. People talked about the 10-year struggle before the council agreed on principle in April 22 to relocate the plant. But for some, it was the last straw when, as light appeared at the end of the OPP tunnel, a far worse odour issue started appearing from the wastewater treatment plant. And residents are still worried that the OPP may not be relocated and that smell may return, which led to the suggestion for improvement around the keeping the affected community informed of progress. And I noted the chair of the community board picked up on the same topic earlier in the morning. The third point was a deep feeling that if these odour issues had been affecting other areas of Christchurch, they would have been addressed far more quickly. These communities were not being heard, and the feeling was if the relationship had been better, it might not have taken the council so long for the council to understand how badly these communities were suffering. So that's why we have put in recommendation 1, prioritise strengthening and sustaining effective and respectful relationships with the affected communities so as to regain their trust and confidence. Recommendation 2 is about the response recovery structure that was used. And in our view, this was probably the most, setting up a program management steering committee was probably the most significant mistake made. It sent the message to the organisation that this was a business as usual response, and it wasn't. If there had been an incident management team based on a SIMS structure, a coordinated incident management system structure, many of the issues that we talk about in the report would have been addressed far more quickly. Priorities would have been better established, resourcing issues would have been brought to high-level attention more quickly, roles and responsibilities would have been better defined, and there would have been more attention paid to risk management. So that directly leads to recommendation 2, which is endorses the use of an IMT based on the SIMS model as a standard response structure for significant large-scale events. And from the discussions we had with council staff, it's a structure that had been used before and had been used has been used afterwards. It just wasn't used for this event. And I feel that if it had been, then I probably wouldn't be talking to you today. There are two other issues that merit highlighting. One is about the communications and engagement. The council didn't want to say this is an unknown space and we are working through it. Instead, in the first few months, the council downplayed the significance of the damage to the trickling filters and the potential consequences. There was an opportunity to tell the story before it happened, to share the problems and the risks of terrible odours with the community and help their understanding of what lay in front of them, but it was lost. And when we talked to the community reps about this, would your response have been different if you had been warned in, say, January, February, that there is a potential of serious odours and we will make sure we have the right information for you? The response was yes, but we had to work so hard to convince the council there was a problem. But if they had been engaged right from the start with the facts, and there was a risk of these odours, there would have been more of a we are in it together process. The community could have been warned, partner agencies prepared, and advice readily available. And that's one of the reasons that led to the suggestion for improvement around developing a communications and engagement strategy now. Better to have that document ready in the cold light of day rather than trying to develop something when you're in the heat of battle. The last one I wanted to talk about in terms of problem issues was so that even now the plant is far from being in a robust condition. And I quote from a presentation to the council in May 2023. What you have is a highly lean temporary system with no redundancy operating at its limit. The silence on what the replacement plans are has residents worried. And this cannot happen again to the eastern suburbs. So that led to the suggestion for improvement on keeping the community informed on progress with replacement plans. So there are some other things I want to acknowledge, we want to acknowledge. The first of those is that the challenges the council faced at the time of this issue needed to be recognised. This was an organisation already under pressure. A new third-tier structure had, I think, been announced the day of the fire. Banks Peninsula water treatment plant and wastewater treatment plants were coming back in-house at the start of 23. Staff turnover had doubled, like most of local government at that time. COVID-19 controls were still actively being enforced, and I've just looked at those again, and you couldn't imagine a worse time to be trying to engage with a community. Global supply chains were disrupted by COVID and then disrupted even more by the Ukraine war. And although Christchurch is a big organisation, I'd imagine there was a considerable amount of resources going into the debates over the Te Kaha multi-use arena and new density rules that the government was seeking to impose. So this was not a good time for an organisation to be agile and responsive. One of the things as a CE, you know, is that one of the things I liked about working for local government is that everybody gets up every day and comes to work, and their main motivation is to make life better for their community. And that's nothing different here. One of the things that we had to do was, the purpose of our review was to understand what happened from systems and processes point of view, what went well, what could have been done better, and provide practical recommendations for improvement. Part of that was to understand how the community felt and to provide a community voice. So a lot of our commentary is based on how things seem from outside the organisation. But some things went really well. The technical response, losing 60% of the BOD treatment capacity of the plant was unprecedented. But your Three Waters team picked up that challenge. They kept that plant running somehow. They never stopped the flow to the plant. It ran most of the time complying with discharge consent requirements, and managed to get it fixed by the end of July, and that needs to be acknowledged. The second 5 months, once the council realised there was a problem and started treating it as an all-of-organisation issue, when the citizens and community group got involved in the community partnerships team, there was a lot of positive comment from the community about what was happening then. Another one, the site visits and face-to-face communication over the paint discoloration also got a lot of praise and compliments. But unfortunately, the community had not been well informed over the first 6 months. So by the time they were better informed about what the council was doing and what it was trying to do, they were so unhappy it didn't matter anymore. That opportunity was really lost in the first 6 months. But as I said, council staff get up each day trying to do their best for the community. My observation of your staff is that they're very loyal, very committed. And some of them worked huge hours to respond to that crisis as it unfolded, to try and make life better for the community, and also to keep their business as usual jobs going as well. And that needs to be acknowledged. I've seen the media coverage and it hasn't been yet, but it should be. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to answer questions.
Okay, so we do that.
Would you, Mayor, like to just do the improvement plan next, or would you like to take questions at this point on the report?
I think we'll do questions. Questions. Anybody got any questions of Pat?
Of Pat.
Yeah. Councillor Donovan?
Hi, Pat. Thank you. There was a bit of feedback that there were a few. Thank you for the work on the report. It was really helpful to read through that. There are a few items in the report that there was some feedback that those sort of that some aspects might have been missed or might not have quite correctly portrayed some of the detail. Do we have an opportunity to add that in?
No, our report is complete. And look, if we had written down and recorded every issue that was raised, this report would be 2 to 3 times the size it is. And if an issue wasn't being raised consistently, then it didn't get in the report. So I'm aware there are things that were raised by 1 or 2 people that are not in this report. But we were trying to provide a balanced report on what a consensus was. So no, we won't be changing our report. I suspect that's, if there are other issues in there, you may wish to introduce those as part of the debate around the response plan.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Councillor Johansson?
Thank you, and thank you for your report. I guess the lingering question I have from reading it is, although you've identified some of the key failings, like the lack of urgency, what's not clear from the report is why social well-being and why the lack of urgency in the response. And I just wondered if there's any sort of further light you can give us as to understanding why those things weren't acted on quicker when the requests were coming in. Thank you.
So what we were more focusing on systems and processes, and I think we have identified some of the reasons. I think that there was not a good understanding initially about just how bad that smell could be. I mean, if you haven't, I suspect that some people thought that this might be, if there were problems with odour, it'll be like the OPP plant. And of course, it's nothing like the OPP plant. It's just a world worse. So I think that there was probably, and I've touched on that, but I think a lack of realisation just how bad it could be in the risk assessment at the start. And if people had realised just what it was like, then I think the risk assessment would have been different, and it would have been highlighted, and the response would have been better. I also talked about a lack of monitoring of the data coming in, and particularly the online information. A lot of civil defence organisations now, rather than sending someone out to site to see what's happening, they just scroll through social media to find photos of what's happening out there. And you had a really rich source of data in the comments that were going on different Facebook pages throughout the city, plus your own information coming in that could have seen a response quicker than it did. So I have actually touched on it, but there were probably those types of opportunities where things could have been done differently. And that's one of the reasons I talked about the incident management team, where you have an intelligence team who their job is to find out what's happening. And that's the first thing they would have been doing, is looking for those rich data sources. So the opportunity was there, but I think that not setting up the IMT was the failing, was a critical source of the problem there.
Final question from me is given that one of the themes of the report too is around that idea of financial prudence, I guess at the expense of people's, health and well-being. in terms of redress or fixing the problems, how big a consideration do you think we should give to additional investment into the communities that were the most impacted from this?
I think as a consultant, I probably went as far as I could when I said that you need to be engaging with those communities through the LTP process and find out what their concerns are and what the fix might be. So no, I'm not going to try and put a number against that. I know that just like every other council in the country, Christchurch City Council is facing its financial challenges.
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you, Councillor Johansson. Thank you, Pat, for an extremely good report. In my view, you hit the nail right on the head, especially about the concerns of the local, of the affected community. So I'll now ask Mary Richardson to come up and talk to the response.
So before Mary and Katie open up on the improvement plan and the response, I think it's important that I say a few things. As the Chief Executive and on behalf of the organisation, I formally apologise for the matters we did not get right and assure you that we are fully committed to engaging with both the community and the community boards to deliver the improvements that we will be working through with the community, particularly for the East, and also to stress the points that Pat made, to commend the operational staff who delivered no interruption of service all the way through that period, and to thank Pat for a very comprehensive and useful report. So I'd like to pass over to Mary Richardson now to take us through the key issues on the improvement plan.
Kia ora, thank you very much. Look, I won't go into a lot of details about this. The council has been briefed around this and also heard a comprehensive report from Pat. What we have done is Pat's report and the review identified the need for a coordinated response and plan. We have attached and developed an initial plan, and that initial response, along with the recommendations that are up there today, really sort of reiterate the need to recognise the impact this had and apologise that response did not consider early enough the well-being of the community. It's actually and makes a commitment to co-develop a plan with the community board, affected communities and key partners. So to make sure that that is a collective and co-developed plan rather than a council sort of response alone. And also, as Pat has done, CE has done, and the recommendations do want to also acknowledge the work by the team at the wastewater plant, as the recommendations identify the responses still ongoing and actually still potentially have an impact on the community as we try and manage the stench and that plant on a very limited capacity. So that acknowledge the work that the team are doing out at the plant, and also as the report and the recommendation do also acknowledge the work by comms and community support, and also their commitment to continue with that work. And then lastly, just to acknowledge the partners and the community that have worked with us and have dealt with the situation and have made a commitment to continue to work with us on that co-design and getting our relationship back on track with that community. So I won't go into details. I think the report says it all, as does the recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Now, I am more than happy to move this before we get into questions. Is there a Councillor Cotter will second it. So are there any questions of Mary? Councillor Johansson and Councillor McDonald.
Thank you. Appreciate the work that's been done. I guess just picking up on the concern around financial prudence as being one of the key reasons why things possibly weren't done. What sort of assurance or undertaking can we get today as a council that the actions that we pass today will be implemented in a timely fashion and will have resources made available to progress?
So there's a recommendation up there that identifies that we will initiate the co-design work and have some of that. It may not be completed because we have to go with the time that's suitable for the community and the partners, but we will have work done or some work done in time to inform the LTP.
Recommendation 5.
Yep. Okay, so any more questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor. Oh,
Clear on that. I appreciate if we pass recommendation 5. What I guess all I'm trying to understand is that for that work to happen, it will require some resource. So is there a resource that will be made available to work with the community board, and the key stakeholders to develop that plan? And that's really what I want an assurance around.
So my response is that all the staff at council have a lot of work to do and have a lot of pressure on resources and time, and are all stretched, but the key staff have made a commitment to ensure that we dedicate time to this and will identify some resources to support it. But we may, depending on what the co-design identifies, we may have to come back to council to if there's additional resources, because we only have the budgets and the time we have.
okay, Councillor McDonald.
Hey, thank you for that, Mary. This one's probably slightly out of scope, but I want to ask it anyway because I think it's important. Probably putting your infrastructure hat on, or one of your many hats. In terms of I guess the challenge we've got is that we're working through a confidential process, which you would expect around the insurance claim. We know that in the coming weeks, I think the team are working through a public timeline that we can manage, so that we can work through that. Is there anything else the team need at the moment to keep the treatment plant going? Are we confident in terms of the resourcing, in terms of what we're doing, knowing that there will be the occasional issue that does crop up potentially, but is there anything in your mind we could be doing as a council to support the team to ensure that that's, because it's got such a big impact right across the city? Could you just give a view on that? Sorry, it's a wee bit out of scope.
That's right.
But I think
So the team out there are challenged daily by running the plant with that capacity, with that learning capacity, and they are juggling the aerators working and not working, and the different challenges they face. Perhaps I could come back with a comprehensive report, because there's a lot of technical details and technical issues and breakages and fixing and new things being brought in. So Adam Toos and his team are doing a significant job out there, but it is incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
And so the sooner that we can actually start on the permanent solution, the better.
Yeah.
Because it is on a rubber band, to use a cliche.
Yeah.
So, but I'll talk to Adam and see if there's anything extra that we could put in there that would just give us a little more surety.
Well, thank you for that. I guess the point of asking that probably in public is, I'm sure all my colleagues agree that, we want this, we're as supportive as we can be in terms of keeping this open. So a report might be useful, not taking up too much time, but just to understand if there's things we can be doing that we aren't doing currently. Great, thank you.
Yeah, a great answer, Mary, and you did right. Adam and the co are working right on a knife edge from hero or zero, and it's not going to take much to pivot one way or the other, so we need to be aware of that. Councillor Harrison Hunt, please.
Kia ora, Mary, just one question. Who are the key staff that you talked about in regards to addressing resolution 5 here?
Right. So we are putting together a team to respond to that, which includes the community board team, the community team, the comms team, and also some of the people involved in the initial response. So we're developing that team. It's meeting next week to develop and identify, and then we will be talking to the community board chair as well, and about how we work with co-design. We have already spoken to some of the key partners who have flagged their commitment to be involved. So so there's
Cool.
there's that.
Follow up, how many of the ELT will be a part of that group?
I'll be part of that group.
And Dawn, will you be?
I will be talking with Mary very regularly.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Councillor Donovan?
Kia ora, Mary, thank you. Just in response to point 5 of the resolutions, I'm aware that the community boards and the Waiteau Coastal Linwood Community Board in particular is sort of quite stretched. I know that's true across the organisation, but our community board in particular, I think, is particularly stretched because of the range of different issues that we're dealing with. In terms of developing and working with community, will we consider bringing in some external resource to complement the existing resource?
Yep. So we tend to talk to the community board and that team. It may be an advantage to have a independent person coming when you're doing co-design, and particularly with a community where the relationship in some areas is not as strong as it could be. They may be more confident and are happy to have an independent person, and we have looked at potential resourcing for that.
Great. And the second very quick follow-up to that is in terms of the key stakeholders, one bit of feedback was making sure that we include some of those grassroots organisations that were heavily involved in working with council to develop that response at the time. So they helped organise some of the meetings and things, so making sure that they're part of that, not just the formalised community stakeholders that we might typically engage with.
Right.
So just making sure that we understand.
Yep. So there's a mix, and we've tried to recognise that in the report where we've talked about agencies and community groups.
Yeah,
so there's
perfect.
two different things. The agencies are the structured agencies, and they're often largely government agencies or professional agencies, and then there's community groups. So we've tried to reflect that. So that's our intent.
Okie dokie, right. So we'll go into debate, thank you. And I will say that we've had some amendments from Councillor Johansson and Councillor Donovan, which Mary has worked very hard with. They are happy with those, and which we've acknowledged the concerns, especially with the roles of council going forward. So thank you for your time with that, Mary. Have we got any debate, please? Councillor Peters?
Thank you. I'd like to reiterate the importance of us as an organisation, both formally apologising today for this and to look to learn from this as an organisation so that we can really ensure this never happens again to any of our communities. So thank you to the staff who have worked so hard to keep that plant running for a start. The whole city depends upon that, and thank you. Thank you to the staff that have worked through the response, and I think it's a point of maturity today for us as a council to be taking this report on board and learning from it, and we really need to ensure that we learn all the lessons that we need to learn from this, and get this incident management team and the likes in place so that we don't have to have communities going through this again. So happy to support this today, and really keen for us as a council to begin this healing process with these suburbs and the residents out in the east. And rest assured, as a council, we're committed to working with you and getting back onto a better footing and helping you in your lives out there to exist and thrive. So apologies, and let's move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Councillor Harrison Hunt, please.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the report. It's highly confronting, and it shows a lot of things that we can work on, which I am very appreciative of. And for me, I wasn't obviously in term when this obviously went down. But one thing I can say is I want to talk about my mum for a second. The reason being is it's about relationships. And my mum actually she grew up in Bournemouth Crescent, right near Hampshire Street there on the east. And she was there for quite a lot of her life. And she lived next to the Frosts, who are still there. And the things that she learnt from that street was something called whanaungatanga, which is around connections. And the things that she taught me were actually very simple. The first one is whanaungatanga, which is connection, is non-reciprocal. It's non-transactional. You don't expect things back when you give something like kindness or you give something of value. The other thing is partnership. Now, partnership is transactional. Partnership means you give me something and I'll give you something. That is therefore a partnership. So when we're looking at this, the thing that I feel like we're missing, particularly in a big beast such as the council, is we sometimes miss that whanaungatanga part with our communities. It tends to be in regards to some sort of reciprocation. You give us your time, community, and we'll give you this. And when we're looking at that, there's also another layer of that, which is silos, and that was defined quite heavily in the report here around our inability to be able to work with other organisations, and I completely understand that. But here are some things we do know. We do technical things really, really well. Our staff are amazing in terms of the technical aspects of our work and the things that we do. They are experts in their field and they are phenomenal. And when we strategize communications, we open ourselves up to perceptions, particularly in a beast like this, around a master-servant relationship. And that there is the issue in itself. So I have 4 things I wanted to talk about, and one of them was be present. Number 2 is be open. Number 3 was keep the community informed in everything we do. And the 4th one is a different one, which is don't rely on strategy or policy to be the be-all or end-all. Work outside that. And for staff, their best asset is themselves. And for us as leaders, our best assets is ourselves too. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been elected. So the things that I'm saying here is have a bit of whanaungatanga, work outside of that policy and all of those things that mandate us to do all of these things, and continue to just be yourselves and be kind. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Barber.
Yeah, thanks for that. Look, I think first, I also want to acknowledge the excellent report from Pat. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, really comprehensive. I went through that process as chair of the community board at the time in that area. I think there's so much to learn here. I mean, obviously a mistake was made, a fire ensued. Emergency services did a fantastic job on the day to get it under control. And I think, you know, the staff and the contractors to get the plant back up and running in such a difficult situation, I think they did an amazing job. And it's great to see that positive side of things is acknowledged. I really understand the feelings of the people in the East, feeling neglected and I'll never forget where I was when I first smelt the smell, the putrid smell coming out of the plant. I was actually in town at the time and I was gobsmacked at how bad it was and just couldn't imagine actually living with it day after day, being in close proximity to it, And from what I understand, there's little that could be done to stop that smell other than repair the plant and work out a system where we could get the plant running. And it continues to happen day after day. They face issues out there and they're dealing with them incredibly well. But I guess this report is more about what we could have done better. And I think if there's one thing it teaches us as a council is that our communication should have been clear, concise and consistent from day one. People understand if we can't fix the smell, but they want to know how long, what's happening, what can be done to help them in their situation. And we needed to do that every day. So there's so much that we've learnt from this, and I hope that we don't have to go through this sort of thing again. But fantastic report, and really pleased to see it. Thanks.
Okay, so Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. I think it is a really thank you, Pat, for doing the work on this. I too was part of the interview process for this, and I think it's actually been useful in a sense to highlight some of the challenges that we had from it. It's sort of difficult in a way because I think the council often gets blamed, and quite rightly, sometimes quite rightly so, but other times, not necessarily for good reason. The reality is we didn't start the fire. The challenge was with, as publicly sort of noted, contractors and subcontractors, and immediately the team swung into action to fix it and keep it going. And I sort of think about it and go, well, actually, what was the telling point for me? And the smell was one of them, but actually the second one was fronting the public meeting, which in my view was far too late, which we did out in the community. And I have a lot of public meetings, and Phil comes along in my area, and I've never experienced that level of anger from a community over that lack of communication. And I think it just goes to show that actually, a bit like what Tyler said, fronting up is the only way you can deal with situations like this. Being present in the community is one of them. and actually taking sort of the stuff they throw at us as well. We learnt a lot from that, and I think looking back from my point of view, the thing I would have done early, and I'm happy to apologise as well, was probably have far stricter governance oversight of the whole process. I think if you look at what changed when we began having those weekly or bi-weekly updates to council, that was useful for the public to see, but it also shifted the focus of the organisation internally because it put a lot more pressure on. So there are two streams of work happening, the team getting it up and running, and they did an amazing job. And I think the communication side, which also did, in my view, a good job. I think there's always going to be improvements, but it's sort of unfortunate in a way because these reports are good in a sense because they highlight the challenges it had, but at the same time we're kicking people, that actually work really, really hard within our organisation. So I just think it's worth having a bit of caution around that. There are things we could have got better. I think this is an unprecedented event in New Zealand. We did not start the fire, and the team responded as best they could at the time. But for me, like I say, that level of anger just shows the ongoing issues that have been in that community for some time. And I think something we do need to focus in on as we look at the LTP. But I think it's important to acknowledge that there are improvements, but the teams that worked really, really hard, both operationally and communications, did a good job in my view as well. There's always stuff that's going to be wrong. It's the nature of emergencies and responses. But if we can make some improvements from this moving forward, we'll be better as a city. But I just caution, I'd hate for it to be a public perception that we're running down the teams that actually worked their guts out for weeks and weeks and weeks. When actually, if you think about things like the smell, we didn't have an answer at the time. Fundamentally, we did not know what would stop that straight away, but we worked on stuff and we were agile as we could be to get a solution. And as soon as we did, we moved forward. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well.
Well, thank you. Councillor Cotter?
Yeah, thank you. And following on from Councillor McDonald's comments, and I think the report does outline that we did get it right in the end, but it took too long, and that's the big learning from this. But I'd like to thank the Chief Executive for your words of apology and your commitment on behalf of the organisation going forward to honour these resolutions as well. And whanaungatanga, Councillor Harrison-Hunt, I think this organisation has to really realise the value of community boards in these sorts of things. Community boards know their communities, and their communities know the community boards, and they reach right out like a mycelium into the forest. So we need to take full advantage of our community boards in these situations, and then also our elected members. And you talked about silos, but we also still have silos within this organisation, and I think that was called out in the report as well, that if we could work more as cross teams together, we'd be better off. But look, I also want to reiterate that the report here, and thank you for the report, Pat, highly commends our Three Waters team for continuing to do an outstanding job. And it can't be reiterated enough that the job that they're doing out there at the plant, just keeping it going, doesn't be thinking about if it crapped out. And also it calls out that highly commends the community teams, the community groups, and the interagency response group for also providing good support for the affected communities. So going forward, this council needs to get these support systems activated immediately in the event of another disastrous circumstance, should there be one. And the key to this is the incident management team. It's the key to getting things right in the future. So this is about, I think we draw a line here, it's about going forward and getting things right, taking the learnings and implementing it within the organisation. So it's a great set of recommendations there, which I'll be fully supportive of.
Thank you. Right, my last bit. The Bromley area community, Yanni. Oh no, I'll go last. Right, Councillor Johansson.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge the work on the report and start with a Māori proverb. He aha te mai nui o te ao. Hei tangata, hei tangata, hei tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is people. As a council, collectively, we have failed the people in the East. While individually, some of us worked our hardest to impress upon our colleagues and council staff the issues that were happening in real time and early on, at informals, via email, through various council processes, it was not enough to convince the majority to take action in a proactive manner. I personally made repeated calls of action to address the psychosocial impact and for a coordinated approach of the CWTP fire from almost as soon as it happened. This report makes it clear we were too slow to respond. It highlights that there was no sense of urgency, that there were poor relationships, that were risks that were not properly recognised or reported, and that people felt council prioritised financial prudence at the expense of the health and well-being. People suffered from nausea, vomiting, coughing, headaches, sleeplessness, watering eyes, lack of physical activity, physical isolation, and worry. The irony is that we have signed a pledge as a city to have greater resilience. We joined global disaster recovery networks and hosted symposiums to learn lessons post-quake. The extraordinary thing is that you could understand this happening in another city, perhaps one who had not experienced the decade of disaster that we had, but yet despite all of our discussions and our learnings, we failed to do the basics when it mattered most. Well, today is our chance to take collective responsibility for what happened and begin the journey towards helping heal the harm that was caused. This will require not just words, but a commitment to resources and investment in the local communities who bore the brunt of the impact. Clearly from the report and as local councillor, it is abundantly obvious that there's a significant level of environmental inequity in the east of the city. The review highlights this as an area of concern. The organics plants, the shipping containers, the metal scrap yards, car dismantlers, toxic chemicals in the river, the munted roads and footpaths. People's quality of life is being adversely impacted by the lack of action in dealing with these things in a timely manner. The irony is that the pace of which problems around a rugby stadium for professional sports can be addressed is far quicker and nimbler than the pace of things that are on the east that get dealt with, which are ruining people's lives on a daily basis. In conclusion, I want to acknowledge the community. While we have failed collectively as a council, the community collectively stood up to hold us to account. Many individuals, despite the horrible circumstances they faced, rose up to support action. I thank them for that. The solution going forward is to involve them in what we do. And in conclusion, I end with a former mayor's quote when we signed our resilience pledge. "Community engagement lies at the heart of the matter," she said, and then quoted Professor Gluckman, the Prime Minister's chief scientist. It follows that from the psychosocial perspective, those involved in directing the recovery should create governance structures that understand and actively include community participation and enhance individual and community resilience. Such approaches will be most likely to be effective in re-establishing coping and functioning communities. Thank you.
Councillor Donovan.
Well said, Mr. Johansson.
Kia ora koutou. I'd like to just start by acknowledging, as we've done so in the apology, the impact on residents from the fire and the offensive stench. And I think it's important to note that this happened in a wider context. This has been a part of a wider environment with a double whammy with the impacts of odours from the organics processing plant. So I think it's appropriate that council's now formally apologised, because this is a recognition that this is a starting point for where we can do better. I'd also like to acknowledge the community and their efforts to work with council and raise these concerns, and also one of the local councillors, Yanni Johansson, for his advocacy on this issue. I think it's vital that we centre the community voice and make sure that we listen closely to those that are most closely connected to their communities, and I think that was a key finding from this report. I'd also like to acknowledge the authors of the report for providing feedback. I think that's been really helpful, and also staff. I think it's important to know that, we're asking staff to respond to a situation that wasn't business as usual, and we're asking them to take on extra work and respond to a situation that was unprecedented. So, I'd like to acknowledge that, in particular, Gary and Katie worked very closely with many members of the community, and appreciate that that's been a huge amount of work on their behalf. In terms of moving on to the report, I think the report itself is recommendations are clear and unambiguous. We should have done better. This isn't the first time we've had to deal with a crisis, and when disaster struck, our response was poor and slow. Our initial response would describe it as an unpleasant odour, despite feedback from community that this was far worse than this. Our technical response, as everyone has noted, was excellent. However, in terms of our wellbeing response, we're far too slow to react. Urgency was lacking, and that was a key shortcoming, and it's a learning moving forward. I also want to reiterate that we did get this feedback from our community, so one of the key learnings from this is actually taking that on board. So moving forward, the report highlights the need to rebuild relationships, which, as the report notes, were poor at best. A key part of this is actually recognising that there were real-world impacts on people. Many people had to pay higher costs for power and other things. So moving forward, I'd like to see a clear action plan, which I'm glad to see is recommended in the resolutions. And to bring about changes, we need to move beyond business as usual to something concrete and to implement those changes as part of our long-term plan. I just want to thank everybody once again. I think this is an opportunity for us to learn the lessons, to acknowledge the harm caused within communities and to move forward.
Thank you very much. Right, me. The Bromley area have had it bad for years through one thing or another, especially the OPP for 13 years. Now, when the wastewater treatment plant went up in smoke, it was an accident, and a lot of people said, oh, well, that's an accident, we can't help it. OPP wasn't an accident, in my view. And we had with the wastewater treatment plant, we had a bad response, as reiterated in the report, and I apologise along with the council and the CE for that. But the wastewater treatment plant was the straw that broke the camel's back, and people out there have had enough, and this did not help at all. So I'd like once again apologise for that. But one of the good things that came out of it is, as someone said before, community groups and advocacy groups like Sewer Crisis, for argument's sake, they came to the fore and rallied around and got people sort of pointing in the right direction, even though it was a bad direction and the smell was bad. But as I say, once again, I apologise. I will now put the vote because I don't think there's anyone else that wants to speak. So with that, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Aye. Thank you. Carried. Good. So now we move on to item 13. Yep. So who's